circles and like just total blank stares. Like you understand that this comes from something that it wasn't just like this dude just started playing this tune and it magically appeared. It came from this musical, or it came from this Broadway review. So knowing that kind of history, and of course the standard, please show up early, show up before the drummer. So you can stake your place.
You mean to the top of the form, or just the...
I had the idea to put these two bassists, jazz teachers, jazz bassists, jazz thinkers, whatever you want to say, in the same room together. I knew we'd have a great conversation, and I think we did. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with two past podcast guests and people that are really out there innovating in the jazz bass world. They are, I've delayed long enough, Danny Ziemann and Adam Booker. And what a pleasure to sit down with both of them live at the D'Addario booth at the International Society of Bassists Convention 2019 to talk jazz, projects, pedagogy, mistakes I made as a bumbling educator, and much more. Wide-ranging and very engaging, I think, conversation. I bet you'll get a lot of takeaways out of this one. And I would like to give a shout-out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, the Bass Violin Shop, Texas Hill Country Bass Collective, A440 Strings, and Colstein Music. More on them later, but let's dig into today's conversation with two of my favorite people, Danny Ziemann and Adam Booker.
This is going to be fun, guys.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you two know each other from
the internet.
Yeah, from the
Is
internet.
this your first time actually meeting in person?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Very cool. I don't remember if I was talking to one of you two, and I said, I want to sit down with both of you, but you're both people that have talked about, in jazz topics, jazz-related topics. You're both actually, obviously, very active in the jazz world. So
And talk bass.
And talk bass.
and talk bass. Yeah.
And Facebook.
Yeah.
And Facebook.
And the Twitters, too.
Yeah.
No, actually, I don't do Twitter, so it's an evil place.
So we're here, ISB 2019.
That's right.
Adam Booker, Danny Ziemann at the D'Addario booth.
That's right. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, totally, man.
Yeah,
This is
and
awesome.
thank you for setting this up, D'Addario. That's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's talk some jazz. Let's
Okay.
talk jazz bass. So both of you, you're always doing interesting projects, but a couple that are on my radar at least is Danny's done a series of courses with Discover Double Bass.
Yep.
Very cool. Bass Player's Guide to the Trio.
Yep. Walk
Walk
on.
On.
And there's
Walk On,
actually
yeah.
another one in the can. That's I call it the Rhythm Workshop. I think it's the Rhythm Workshop, but
Yeah.
basically it's a course on how to play time with the rhythm section and how to develop an independent sense of time that is relatable for other people.
Okay.
So just like be the most swinging person you can possibly be.
Cool.
Hopefully.
Cool. And then Adam's done a ton of things. He was running the Luca. What were you doing in Luca at the Luca Bass Festival?
I
A
don't
lot of
remember.
things.
It was so much. So at Luca, I was doing a bunch of recitals, but I was also honored to be the instructor for they call it the amateur jazz camp. And for Bass Euro. So I spent a week teaching jazz to some European bass players. It was a lot of fun.
Cool.
It was great because I could bring in, they just kind of gave me free reign. Teach anything you want to teach, do anything you want to do. And, it's an interesting thing because I'm taking these, like, classically trained European double bassists and trying to give them an overview of how our instrument works in the jazz world. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you're working on a new album.
working on a new CD right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully September, October release.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a crossover. So it's like half of it's my original jazz stuff, and the other half is Seven Last Words from the Cross by David Hayes.
Oh,
so
nice.
it's going to be because part of my job in academia is I teach both jazz and classical,
Okay.
and so once in a while it's nice. My last album was straight ahead jazz, and this album's got a little bit of both. It's just kind of show off a little bit more of what I'm supposed to be doing, I guess.
It's a great record, the last one.
Oh, thank
I
you.
did the review for the ISB
yes,
or for Bass World magazine. And man, I loved it. It was like very, very concise, and to try and balance the role of being a band leader and the bass player and the composer and all. It's like so difficult.
Yeah, it's a lot of hats.
Yeah.
It really is. I took a hands-off approach to the band, because bass players, how often do we lead an actual jazz band, So
Yeah.
that would be just be such a synthetic, artificial setup if I were in the studio with these amazing musicians and tried to like run it like a tyrant. That's just not how it works in the real world, and that's not how I wanted it to sound on the CD.
Producer and bassist and all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I'm just a bass player, man.
We're all just bass players.
Yes, yes.
So since I've got you both here, so let me ask some selfish questions maybe they're not, because this would be more for past Jason. But I used to teach at DePaul University, and they have a setup. Maybe it's an old school setup, but they have a setup where you're a jazz bass student and you've got to study classical lessons, or quote unquote classical lessons, for 2 years, and then you're taking jazz lessons with the jazz teacher. And I always struggled so much with, like, what should I be doing with these people? So what should I have been doing with those people? What are the skills that someone like me, who I've got chops, I've got the knowledge of the fingerboard, I've got all this, I've got a fairly limited jazz knowledge, I don't know what I would contribute in that regard, but what should someone in my role, in your opinion, have been doing in that kind of setup? Scales, methods, pieces, you name it. Just give me some thoughts.
I'll give a few things if that's cool, and then
Yeah, go ahead, man. Do it.
So generally, the first thing that I would do is just work on getting a nice pizzicato sound, because I think the bass players already have some understanding of fingerboard geography. Just like, okay, where do I point my scales, et cetera, et cetera. And I think teaching people how to walk bass lines and think about walking patterns is easier if they have a sonic frame of reference. So that way, everything they're doing is relating back to that sort of idiomatic sound. So even just playing open strings and getting used to using the right muscle groups to produce a sound across different dynamics. And then from there, you can get into vocabulary and things, or like put limitations on, like just do a bass line using chord tones in half position or something. But again, for me, just starting with sound is like the easiest way to establish a quote unquote correct sounding jazz bass line.
Okay.
So, Dr. Booker?
Oh gosh, don't call me that. So yeah, and you know, that's a great question, because you know, I like I said, I have to teach both, and more often than not, what I get are a lot of like 18-year-old beginners, basically, like, because we have a huge music industry program at my school, so we get a lot of electric bass players that come in and we're like, okay, welcome to college, here's your upright, and they're like, huh? So you know, I have some students that were like, you know, one story in particular, I had a student last year, my first year at App, and we're about halfway through the semester, and it's like, Dr. Booker, when are you going to teach me how to play jazz? I'm like, well, what do you think I've been doing, man? You know, and I've got him working out of the Simandl book and some supplemental materials and things like that. I was like, I don't understand. I was like, well, you got to know how to hold the bass. That helps, especially if you're going to be playing a 4-hour gig. You got to know how to play in tune. All these things that I'm applying to. So I guess my message to like the hardcore classical instructor is, what's worked for me in the past and what works for the students is just having the facility, knowing the geography better, finding pieces, especially making them play musical things like Marcello sonatas and the Vivaldi sonatas, all the big books, things like that, and just getting their intonation so set and their ability to shift up and down the strings so set, even up to the thumb, you know, up to the octave G, and then you know, start working beyond that when they're ready. And the other thing I found is it's different for each bass player. So I get a lot of like really great electric players, and for them, they jump on the Vance method stuff like nobody's business, because they get that horizontal across the string concept in the left hand a lot easier. So the vertical, the 4 feet of shifting that we have to do just doesn't compute a lot. So I get a lot of electric bass players started on Vance. If it's like a more beginner or an intermediate bass player that has a lot of or some experience on upright, I actually kind of slow them down a little bit and get them on things like Simandl, very basic, very fundamental, make sure it's in tune, and down there in that half position that we call the rent range, you know, because you're going to be, if you're a jazz bass player, you're going to spend a lot of time down there.
The rent range, the cash register.
The cash register, yeah, exactly.
The cash register, I like that.
I think it was Ben Wolf actually pointed it out to me, and I'd already been playing for like 15 years before he pointed this out. And he's like, you realize that the way the bass is tuned, it's up to, you know, first position, and then a little bit further, you have all 12 notes of Western music in that half position, first position area. Yeah. So a bass player that knows how to be creative down there can start shifting that up and up and up and up, but they have to know that geography a little bit better. And then musicality too. Yep. You know, the learning. I like solos. I'm a big solo head. So you know, I like my bass players to learn how to play melodically and things like that. So I try to pick music that'll help enhance that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you wish you'd been taught in school that you know, it could be like, we could go any direction. What now that you're teaching the way you're teaching, the people that you're teaching. What do you wish had been covered? You both have different academic backgrounds, so what do you think?
I need a second to think about this. So.
I'll answer. I was probably taught it, but I definitely didn't pay enough attention. Piano. I wish I had paid more attention in both, that piano class that we all took in our undergrad and the jazz piano class that I eventually had to take. I wish I did okay, but I wish I'd have stuck with it. I wish I didn't stop, and I wish I didn't quit practicing that because I was just playing bass all the time.
Yeah.
Because that could be such a... I remember when I was at UT with John Frimkin, a lot of times our lesson was him was playing piano. He's comping chords behind me and trying to solo and everything. And, I wish I could bring that to my studio for those kind of things.
Yeah, I wish I paid more attention to piano as well. And I think I actually, spoiler alert, I actually practice more piano and play more piano than I do bass these days because I'm starting to realize the more I understand about playing piano and the more I understand its relationship to jazz music, the better it makes my bass playing.
Yeah.
So it's like I try to play bass. I mean, I play it every day, but I try to get most of my time with the bass on gigs, and then most of my musical, learning new information just through piano. So I think piano, and just also understanding that, it's hard in college to feel like you have an independent voice and an independent sense of musicality without feeling bad about it compared to what other people are doing. Like, I was never the guy that practiced 8 hours a day ever, and a lot of my friends were, and I always felt a little bit not overshadowed by them, but just feeling like I was not adequate enough. And it's not the truth because everyone has their own way of learning. So just sort of the psychology of being a musician when you're also like going into adulthood and dealing with all sorts of things like, I have to pay my rent. I'm dealing with heartbreak. There's all this other stuff going on. So disassociating those things.
I was having an interesting conversation with Kenneth Knudsen, who's a jazz bassist based out of Denmark. Sorry, Kenneth, if I'm getting that wrong, but he was, and I was asking him how you're traveling all over the place. Like, how do you stay consistent with practicing whatever? And he talked about thinking about it as working on his musicianship. So he spent many hours a day working on his musicianship. That could be on the bass, that could be at the piano, that could be listening, that could be doing all sorts of things. And if you think about it that way, you want to be working on all that stuff anyway. Score study, composition,
right.
So
it's all connected especially once you get to a certain point. It's kind of like a musical singularity. It all runs together.
Yeah.
And it all feeds the same part of the brain, the soul, and all that stuff. So.
This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They're always happy to assess basses for trade-in, consignment, or even purchasing outright. Contact them to schedule a time to discuss your bass and your future needs. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Here's a great tip. Change your strings 2 at a time, removing them from the inside out, then replacing them from the outside in allows for easy access to the lower pegs, ensuring strings lay neatly in the peg box. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Consistency among bass lines, consistency among the different products you offer, that's something that Upton Bass excels at. Here are Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on that topic.
Like continuity of product, which we have fabulous reputation. We've got great product across the marketplace.
Do you have seconds? No.
Right, yeah, exactly. No.
Seconds are in the dumpster.
For almost 20 years, Upton Bass has been delivering top-notch basses at every price point, consistency and continuity, like Gary said, across the line. And if the wood's not good, like Eric said, it goes in the dumpster. They are the real deal, made in America. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast.
Business skills that aspiring jazz bassists should know, things not having to do with the playing of the music. Any thoughts? Something I always am interested in.
Okay, so I am the blossoming entrepreneur. So I think that if you can find ways to capitalize on just skills that you have that you really love, that motivate you to go further. So, for example, like the books, or the books are probably the biggest thing for me. Like I had this desire to write books and share information with people, and I did it. The first one, it went well. I did the second one, it went well. And every time I finished one, I was like, I'm never going to do this again, ever, because it was so much work. But then
that's how I feel about making CDs.
Yeah, yeah, because then people write you and they're like, oh, thank you for this help. And now I feel like it's sort of my passion is helping other people learn this instrument. And therefore, it's kind of my duty and my obligation. So my first book, there was imposter syndrome. It's like, I'm 24, why am I doing this? My second book was like, okay, this is just a necessity to follow up the second one. And then the third one, I'm like, you know what? This is just stuff I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. People like it, and therefore I'm just going to keep on going down that road. And I think the illusion of just doing one thing, like just performing, even the absolute, my idols and my people that I view as being some of the best, they all do more than just playing. Mm-hmm. Not just out of necessity, it's because they like it too, but they all teach, they all have different things that they do. So I think diversifying and not being afraid to make money doing these things is important.
All of that, and also, the bread and butter stuff of actually just being a gigging jazz bass player, know your audience, and that includes who called you for the gig. Yeah. We have the legal versions of the real books now, but I guarantee you anybody over the age of 45 is going to be playing different changes, so you got to do your homework because the tunes are different and the harmonies are written down differently.
Buying the books from the basement of an old music shop, right?
Yeah.
I was
the
old
back
enough
of the car.
I did that too.
My mom went with me to the music shop. She's like, we need the one that we can't ask for.
Right. Yeah. It was like a rite of passage.
I don't know what you're talking about, they'd say, and then they'd lead you.
Brown paper bag.
It was at a jam session. Come out to the car. I want to show you something. I was like, just say no. I don't know what's going on here. But that's
it's just the real one.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Those kind of things, going back and knowing the culture of jazz. I think I'm finding a lot of younger musicians these days don't really know the culture. By that, I'm talking about, like, where does it come from? Where do these songs come from? I can mention, like, 20 musicals and, like, just total blank stares. Like, you understand that this comes from something that it wasn't just like this dude just started playing this tune and it magically appeared. It came from this musical, or it came from this Broadway review, so knowing that kind of history, and of course the standard, please show up early, show up before the drummer. So you can stake your place.
You mean to the top of the form, or just the?
Yeah. Just the business stuff. Just be well dressed. Yes or no, sir. Answer phones. Answer emails, and be there and be present. And then when you're playing, keep your phone in your pocket. Don't pull that out in the middle of a drum solo to check Facebook. Just those professional things.
Every violin shop has its own unique origin story, and here's A440's Michael Spadero on how the shop got started.
My mother-in-law started this business in 1982, and she was a professional cellist. But the story she told me was that Camille, my sister-in-law, is violinist with the LA Phil. Mm-hmm. And when she was maybe in high school, her violin was being repaired in a shop. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, the shop owner had some legal problem where, like, the Cook County Sheriff or someone confiscated all the stuff.
Okay.
So the only way for my mother-in-law to get her daughter's violin back was to buy all the contents of the shop at a police auction.
Okay.
Wow. So since she had all these instruments, I think that's what initially made her start a shop.
It's a great shop. I've gone there for years, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Michael. And folks, check them out at a440violinshop.com. This episode is brought to you by the Texas Hill Country Bass Collective. Join them July 22nd through July 25th for their 6th annual Austin Bass Workshop. Come join friends from the area for 4 days of music, bass, and fun, and work with 2019 featured guest artist and former podcast guest Dennis Whitaker. Learn more at TexasHillCountryBassCollective.com.
There's definitely a looseness in performance culture now.
Yeah.
And like I used to before I lived in Switzerland, I was like suit and tie to most gigs, or like just dress up and look nice. And then over there, it's very relaxed. Like people playing concerts, like just jeans and a shirt. It's like totally cool. And then coming back, I actually noticed that a lot more. It's like a very lax sort of performance culture. Like, oh, you know, whatever. Like we're just here to play, instead of like having that. You know, I mean, it doesn't have to be suit and tie or matching suits, but
I wasn't really. Yeah, that's if the culture calls for wearing like jeans and a t-shirt, fine. But just being present in the music at that time, regardless of what, be part of that, whatever that is.
Yeah, but
check
no,
out.
I agree with you. I agree with you that looking professional and not relaxing on those standards. Like I view that as more of a. It's not necessarily a criticism, but it's like I actually. You know, I enjoy the performance culture where you dress up and you put a little bit more energy and thought into how you're sharing it with other people,
right?
Because it makes a difference.
Well,
really
you
does.
know, honestly, there are times where you can. It's easy to feel like the world doesn't really care about what we do. So we've got to be the ones that care about what we do. And we need to make ourselves look like we care about what we do, and then the world will hopefully respond in kind, or they're more likely than not to. That kind of stuff. You know?
Yeah. Can I add one more thing to the business end? Know how to do your taxes.
Yes.
Like, seriously, if we're like, Jeff Campbell taught me how to do my taxes well when I was in college. Like, my freshman year, he gave us one of the studio classes. Like, we walk in and it just says Schedule C on the board. But it's so true. Like, you need, as musicians, you know, you want to have the best gear available, and you want to know how to do that. I mean, legally, you want to know how you can use the law to, you know, get equipment and things that will help serve your business model.
Right.
So I think it's important, you know, know how to do it.
Exactly. Well, and that's another thing. You know, try to make sure that you're getting the best gear that you can afford. Yeah. Because gear breaks, and you know, and one is none and two is one. So you know, have more than one amplifier if you're using an amplifier. Do please bring that spare set of strings with you to every gig, even if it's like your old cast off. Because if you haven't had a broken string on a gig, I think Rufus Reed says that you haven't even lived yet.
Man, I broke three. There was something wrong with my bass. I broke 3 E strings in like 2 weeks on gigs.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, that was.
So folks who think that bass strings can't break,
they
you're
can.
hearing it right here.
They can and they will.
Well, you know, I think the primary difference between what a working jazz bassist does and what a working symphony section bassist does is when the downbeat starts, we don't stop playing until the break an hour later.
Right.
Versus, you know, 36 measures of tacit followed by, you know, 12 measures of like sheer terror, you know, and then followed by another 55 measures of tacit, you know.
It's a different beast.
We're not allowed to stop, you know. And then that goes on that repeats itself 3 more times on a 4-hour gig. You know, we have 55 to an hour and a half of playing straight through.
Yeah, playing like every note. Every beat.
Yeah.
Every beat, essentially.
And then soloing.
After
everybody else.
It's a different thing.
On Cherokee.
I'm acutely aware anytime I go into that world, it's like, we're talking about different things here.
But, you know, and I'm not complaining. What I'm trying to say with that is that's going to ultimately wear out gear, strings, things like that a lot quicker than what an average classical bassist has to contend with.
Yeah. Especially
strings. And keep your bass clean.
What about, so both of you have worked to some capacity in academia. You know, there's the tenure track world, there's the adjunct world, which are obviously very different things. And I've had so many encounters with people who say, oh yeah, I really want to go teach jazz at college. Thoughts on that?
So the adjunct world, I'm leaving it now, but I've been in the adjunct world for 7 years, or 6.5. And it's like having these aspirations of doing one thing, it doesn't happen. Like if you want to teach jazz bass, get prepared to teach jazz bass and people how to play orchestral music and bass guitar and the occasional cello student, and then you have to do low string studio classes and all sorts of things. So you may have your aspirations for what you want to do, like deep in your heart, but it's just not that simple. I think even if you land a tenure track job, I mean, it's...
Yeah, you know, I mean... First, if you're landing a tenure track job teaching jazz bass, congratulations, you got one of 3 in the world, I think.
So that's a good thing to highlight, because I think people think, oh, they're like 5 per city, right?
No,
sir.
and then if you land a tenure track job teaching bass in any capacity, congratulations, you're like one of maybe 150 in the world. I mean, there's not a lot, and it's. I've noticed a trend lately where it is becoming increasingly, we're going to hire one bass player. That bass player needs to know how to teach jazz and classical.
Yeah.
And,
And they need DMAs or PhDs.
And they need DMAs and PhDs. First off, jazz bass players don't really need a doctorate. This guy coming with a doctorate in jazz bass. But, we don't, because we can work every night if we wanted to. Yeah. We really could. We can go in any major city if we're good players and we got our stuff together. We can work every night. Same thing with jazz piano players. So to actually go get a doctorate in jazz studies as a bass player, or piano player, or rhythm section player of any kind, you've got to want that. That's got to be something that you've made a conscious decision to want to do, because you don't have to. And then, you need to be prepared to be able to play the orchestral rep, be able to play the solo rep, be able to play the jazz stuff, be able to work with faculty in almost any chamber music jazz capacity you can. And yes, string methods is part of the deal. And then on top of that, committee work. I'm on 3 committees in my university, because that's just part of the service work of being in the university. So it's not just going, but I tell you, I wouldn't trade it for a thing, because I'm loving what I do. I'm having a blast. Yeah. But it can be a very daunting task for those that don't know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely, and being. Not just being a great player, but also understanding pedagogy.
Yes.
And not understanding just pedagogy for your own instrument, but understanding pedagogy on a global sense, like what it's like to teach. I mean, you don't have to go for a music education degree necessarily. I don't want to pigeonhole people there, but knowing how, working with diverse learners that may not understand how to learn, like from a theoretical point of view, or like students who are kinesthetic. I remember I had a student whose fingers I would actually push on the bass, because that's how the student learns best, versus someone who learns by ear, versus someone who can read and doesn't learn by ear very well. It's like it's diagnostic, and it's just very different from person to person.
Yeah, as a teacher, I don't call it my studio, I call it my laboratory, because I'm constantly learning, especially I've only been teaching for, I guess, 7 years now. So I'm constantly learning that every semester, almost every day, I'm reevaluating certain things about that kind of thing. But yeah, and then there's that idea that not every great player is a great teacher.
Yep.
And then and sometimes not every great teacher is a great player.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, the tenure track thing, it's a full-time job, and to do that and maintain a full-time gigging career, and then to maintain all the other things on top of that. Especially, if you got a family, you'll go nuts. You'll go absolutely crazy. So it's kind of picking and choosing where your value set is at a certain point. You're going to have a come to Jesus about that.
Well, I'm lucky to be here with 2 people who are great players and great teachers.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad that it's hilarious that this is the first time that you've met in person. But
we did the Bass Hero in Prague, and I think your thing was like an hour before mine on the same day. And
I saw you there, Jason.
Yeah, I remember. I
remember what it was. You were like right below me on the program.
Yeah.
Like it was like, what is? We meet on Facebook and
it's the beautiful thing about events like this.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I know you 2 have a lot to do, but thanks for sitting down and chatting. And
thanks for having me.
Fun.
Thank you, man.
Super fun.
Danny and Adam, let's do this again. That was tons of fun, and no better place than a convention, the ISB convention. And it was so great this time to do it out on the exhibit floor with D'Addario Strings. I'm just so thankful that they set that up. I have done interviews at conventions in the past, but we kind of skulk off into some back room or outside somewhere. This is so much cooler, and it was so great to see people coming by and picking up stickers and magnets. That's all we had for giveaways, but they all got given away. So, and if you were at the convention and came up and said hi, thank you so much. It was great to meet everybody who follows along with the show. I'm just so appreciative and had a totally great time. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and award-winning bass luthier Mitch Mooring. Learn more about what he does at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper of the Backstage Creative Podcast for archiving and cataloging everything we talk about on this show. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.